When was the last time Blake Shelton looked this worried? Right now, in April 2026, he is walking into a federal courthouse every single week, facing charges that could send him to prison for over a decade. The man who spent 20 years grinning on magazine covers, cracking jokes on The Voice, and selling out arenas across America is now sitting at a defendant's table, staring at evidence his own lawyers cannot explain away. But here is what most people are not talking about. The trouble didn't start in 2026. It didn't start in 2025 either. The seeds of this collapse were planted years ago, hidden behind the charm, the fame, and an image so carefully constructed that almost nobody questioned it. So what exactly happened? And how did one of the most beloved names in country music end up here? Stay with us, because the full story is darker and more complicated than anything the headlines are telling you. Blake Shelton was born on June 18, 1976, in Ada, Oklahoma. Ada is the kind of place where people know each other's business without asking, where the same families show up at the same church for 3 generations, and where leaving is considered either brave or foolish, depending on who you ask. His father, Richard Shelton, sold used cars. His mother, Dorothy, ran a beauty salon out of a building on the main strip. The family was not poor, but they were not comfortable in any way that felt permanent. Money came and went, and the house reflected that. Blake grew up understanding that things could change without warning, and that the safest thing you could do was work hard and not draw too much attention to yourself. His older brother Richie was his closest companion through those years. They shared a bedroom, shared friends, and spent summers the way kids in small Oklahoma towns do, riding bikes until dark and staying out of trouble just enough to avoid consequences. Richie was the kind of older brother who made everything feel manageable. When the family dynamic got tense, Richie could diffuse it. When Blake felt uncertain about something, Richie made him feel steadier. And then, in 1990, Richie was gone. He was 24 years old, driving home one November night when his car left Highway 48 and struck a tree. He died at the scene. Blake was 14. The funeral was the kind of quiet, suffocating event that small towns do both well and terribly. Too many people in a too small space, saying things that don't come close to touching what actually happened. Blake sat in the front row and stared at the casket and did not fully process any of it. That kind of loss at that age doesn't land all at once. It settles in slowly, and it changes the shape of everything that follows. The house felt different after Richie died. His parents grieved in ways that 14-year-olds are not equipped to interpret, and Blake did what a lot of young people do when the world stops making sense. He found the one thing that still felt like solid ground. For him, that was music. Dorothy had already taught him a few chords on guitar before Richie died. Blake had always been drawn to it, filling spiral notebooks with song ideas he kept tucked under his bed. But after 1990, music stopped being a hobby and became something closer to a lifeline. He played at local fairs, at family gatherings, at any venue in Ada that would put a 14-year-old in front of a microphone. His voice was already doing something that most teenage voices don't do. It had weight. It sounded like it had already been through something, and people around town started paying attention in a way they hadn't before. Dorothy paid attention most of all. She watched her youngest son pour himself into performance with an intensity that told her this wasn't going to stop. So on Blake's 17th birthday, she handed him a one-way bus ticket to Nashville. No return date, no safety net, just the ticket and the belief that he had something worth betting on. Richard Shelton, his father, had cautioned him for years that chasing music was a gamble that usually didn't pay. But Dorothy had watched Blake practice alone in his room for hours and decided the gamble was worth taking. Blake packed what he could carry and got on the bus. He was 17 years old and had never lived anywhere but Ada, Oklahoma. Nashville in 1994 was not interested in 17-year-olds from Ada. The city had a specific hierarchy, and Blake was at the very bottom of it. He slept on couches, worked construction jobs to stay fed, and played open mic nights at bars where the other musicians talked over his sets. For years, nothing moved. He made connections slowly, sat in on sessions, and kept writing songs in the same spiral notebooks he had brought from home. In 1998, a publishing company signed him as a songwriter, which was a foothold but not a breakthrough. That came in 2001, when Giant Records released his debut single. Austin was the kind of song that radio programmers usually overthink. It was simple. A man calls his ex, gets her answering machine, leaves a message, and comes back to find that she has been listening to it every day without picking up. Country radio played it, and listeners responded immediately. The song hit #1 on the Billboard Hot Country Songs chart and held that position for 5 weeks. For Blake, who had spent 7 years grinding through Nashville's lower rungs, it was the moment the city finally acknowledged him. He was 24 years old and had just recorded one of the most played country songs of the year. What followed was a run of commercial success that most artists in any genre never experience. The Baby in 2003, Some Beach in 2004. Austin had opened the door, and Blake kept walking through it. He released album after album, toured relentlessly, and built a fan base that was loyal in the specific way country music fan bases tend to be, deeply personal and very difficult to lose. By the end of the 2000s, he had accumulated enough hits to fill a greatest hits record twice over. But it was 2011 that changed the scale of everything. NBC launched The Voice in the spring of 2011, and Blake was one of the 4 original coaches alongside Adam Levine, CeeLo Green, and Christina Aguilera. The format was simple. Coaches listened to singers perform with their backs turned, then competed to recruit the ones they wanted. Blake took to television in a way that surprised even people who had known him for years. He was funny without trying too hard. He was direct without being cruel. He genuinely seemed to enjoy the process, and that came across clearly on screen. Viewers who had never bought a Blake Shelton album started recognizing his face. His Twitter following grew into the millions. He became a celebrity in a broader cultural sense than country music alone could have made him. The show ran for over 20 seasons, with Blake as a fixture. He won 9 times as a coach, more than anyone else on the program. His banter with Adam Levine became one of the defining dynamics of the show's early years, and when Adam departed in 2019, Blake's connection with the audience remained steady. The Voice gave him something his music career, successful as it was, had never quite provided: a personality that the general public felt like they knew. And that sense of familiarity is a kind of currency that is very hard to build and very easy to spend. His personal life moved through the same years with considerably more turbulence. In 2003, he married Kaynette Williams, a woman he had known from his time in Ada. The marriage lasted 3 years. They divorced in 2006, and both kept the details private. Then, in 2011, the same year The Voice launched, Blake married Miranda Lambert, a country artist whose own career was ascending rapidly. The pairing made sense on the surface and generated significant media attention. They toured together, collaborated professionally, and presented as a unit that had genuinely figured something out. But the marriage was under pressures that neither of them discussed in public, and in July 2015, they announced their separation in a statement that contained almost no actual information. It was the kind of press release designed to close doors rather than open them, and it worked. The reasons remained largely private. Not long after, Blake and Gwen Stefani, who had joined The Voice as a coach, began a relationship that neither tried particularly hard to conceal. The pairing attracted attention because the two came from genuinely different worlds, country Oklahoma and pop California, and yet the relationship held. They married in July 2021 at Blake's ranch in Tishomingo, a small ceremony attended by people they actually knew. For a period of time, the personal narrative around Blake looked like a redemption arc. 2 public divorces followed by something that appeared stable and real. But in late 2024, things began shifting in ways that weren't immediately visible to anyone outside a specific circle of people. Business partners who had been involved with Blake's ventures for years started pulling back. Legal documents began appearing in county court filings in Oklahoma and California. A former associate gave a recorded statement to attorneys, and people who had worked directly with Blake on real estate and branding projects started retaining lawyers of their own. None of this was public yet. It was happening in the background, in offices and filing rooms, while Blake continued to appear at events and give interviews and present as someone whose biggest professional concern was figuring out what he wanted to do after The Voice. The first public indication that something serious was forming came in early 2025, when a civil complaint was filed in a California court naming Blake as a defendant in a dispute involving a business partnership and allegations of financial misrepresentation. The complaint was detailed. It referenced specific transactions, specific communications, and specific instances in which Blake had allegedly made representations to partners that were not accurate. His attorneys responded by characterizing the suit as an attempt by disgruntled former associates to extract money from a public figure. That is a standard response to that kind of filing, and it closed the immediate news cycle. But the civil complaint was not the end of it. It was the beginning of something larger. Over the following months, additional parties filed related claims. Financial records subpoenaed through the civil process revealed transaction patterns that drew the attention of investigators operating at a different level. By the fall of 2025, people familiar with the matter were describing the situation as more serious than a business dispute. The word that kept appearing in private conversations among people connected to the proceedings was pattern, not a mistake, not a misunderstanding. A pattern that had repeated itself across multiple deals over multiple years. Blake's public presence during this period went noticeably quiet. His social media output slowed. Scheduled appearances were canceled without detailed explanation. Interviews that had been arranged in advance did not take place. His representatives attributed the reduced activity to personal reasons. People who knew the actual situation understood it differently. In January 2026, the matter crossed from civil litigation into something more consequential. Formal allegations of financial misconduct were advanced through channels that carried significantly heavier implications than a civil lawsuit. The core of what was being alleged involved the misrepresentation of financial information in connection with multiple business transactions, the diversion of funds through structures designed to obscure their movement, and a pattern of conduct in which Blake had allegedly used his public reputation to secure agreements from partners who trusted him based on who they believed he was. The gap between who they believed he was and what the financial records reportedly showed was the center of the entire matter. Gwen Stefani appeared alongside Blake at a proceeding in February 2026. She did not speak to press. She has not issued any public statement about the situation. People close to the couple have described the period as extremely difficult. The marriage that appeared to be the stable chapter of Blake's personal life is now navigating something neither of them had prepared for, and the outcome of that navigation is not visible from the outside. Dorothy Shelton, Blake's mother, has attended several of the proceedings. She is 80 years old. She bought her son a one-way bus ticket to Nashville when he was 17 because she believed he had something worth betting on. She has watched him become one of the most recognizable people in American entertainment. She has now watched him sit at a defendant's table and listen to allegations being read aloud in a room full of strangers and cameras. People who have seen her at these proceedings describe her as composed. That is the word they use, composed. Whether what she is feeling underneath that composure resembles anything close to what she felt in November 1990 when the family lost Richie is something only she knows. Nashville has known Blake Shelton for more than 30 years. Producers, publishers, attorneys, business managers, former collaborators. The city has its own memory, and that memory is more granular than anything that makes it into a press release or a profile. People who have been in rooms with Blake over the course of his career have opinions about what was visible and what was not. Some of those people are now involved in the proceedings in one capacity or another. Others are watching from a distance. The ones watching from a distance are, by and large, not surprised. The boy from Ada came to Nashville with $100 and a duffel bag and spent 7 years grinding before the city acknowledged him. That story is real. The talent is real. The work ethic that produced 20 years of hits and 20 seasons of television is real. And somewhere alongside all of that, according to the allegations now being examined in legal proceedings, something else was also real. Something that the cameras and the interviews and the carefully managed public image did not show. How that gap developed, how long it existed, and how much of what people believed about Blake Shelton was accurate and how much was performance are questions that the legal process will eventually force into the open. Whether the answers satisfy anyone, whether they explain anything, or whether they simply leave people with the uncomfortable feeling that they were looking at a version of someone that was never quite complete. That part remains to be seen. The Voice gave Blake Shelton a platform that country music alone could never have provided. It made him familiar to people who had no particular attachment to the genre, people who saw him as a personality first and a musician second. That familiarity was his most valuable asset for a decade. It is now the thing that makes the current situation land as heavily as it does, because the more people felt like they knew him, the more disorienting it is to discover how much they apparently did not. If this story has made you rethink how much we actually know about the people we watch on television every week, share this video. Leave a comment with what you think about it. And if you have followed Blake's career since the beginning, we want to know what you make of all of this now. The one-way ticket Dorothy bought in 1993 took her son somewhere she could not have imagined when she handed it to him. The question now is where the road from this moment leads. And for the first time in a very long career, Blake Shelton does not appear to know the answer.